Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. I'm here with Anne Connelly, entrepreneur and educator in the blockchain space, and we're here to talk about remote and hybrid work. And thanks for joining the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So, Anne, you know, with the rise of remote work or hybrid work, I've always seen you as kind of like one of the people at the forefront of doing that. I mean, can you kind of maybe there's two things that we want to talk about in terms of describing your journey. Like, when did you first get into, let's say, remote or hybrid work? And I guess the second question was there kind of a mental construct that you had to overcome where it's like, hey, I don't have to go into the office from 9 to 5. I can, work anywhere.
Yeah, I've been working remotely for probably 5 or 6 years now. And my business is sort of a mixture of remote work and then days where I have to be, on site in a different city where I don't live. So for a conference or something like that. And I love it. It's been it's been the best. So kind of when COVID hit and everyone was trying to adapt to this new way of working, it was just how I'd always done it. And it really started, I think, mostly because of the industry that I work in. And so when you look at most teams in the blockchain and Web3 space, they are decentralized. They live and work in completely different cities. Everything happens online in Slack or Discord. And so just the way that we work as an industry is already very well poised for the remote work environment. And so that's sort of how it started. And then transitioning into this type of work, I think, has been a little bit easier because I own my own company. And so there's no one that I report to besides my own clients. And so that's made it a little bit easier. But it certainly is a transition to get out of the sort of normal working, structures from the traditional world and move into a space where you just have this incredible flexibility and freedom.
Interesting. I mean, obviously, you're a very unique case in terms of you have that ability to control your work because you are the owner of your own business. But I mean, let's talk through it. I mean, the fact that you're able to work anywhere, whether it's Barbados or Canada or the United States, do you think there were a lot of pre-existing either technologies or mental models that changed in order to enable you to do that versus, let's say, our parents' generation or grandparents' generation too?
I think the biggest change that happened actually wasn't even the mental change from, regular work to remote work. It was more so the change in moving from a structured, 9 to 5, that sort of work life into startup life. And, that leap was a really big leap for me. It was a tough decision. It was, moving into something very volatile that I had never done before. I wasn't doing it at 20, I was closer to 30 at that point in time. And just the lack of structure in that space led me to, be more adaptable to different working hours, different working speeds, how you work with people, where you work with people, all of that changed. And so I would say that more than anything else primed me for the ability to work remotely. And I think also with startups, they're much more likely to use the tools that will connect teams, whether they're beside each other on a big desk or whether they're working overseas. And so that was, I think, probably the biggest change for me.
Interesting. Let's probe on that a bit. I think when you talk about, the transition from traditional to startup, I think everyone in the world has basically, whether positively or negatively, blamed startup culture for, what ails them in the workplace, right? Whether it's colorful chairs or having to be available on Slack 24/7 and all that. Why do you think it was such a transition for you? And like, what were like kind of like the aha moments from like maybe a psychological or personal perspective that said, hey, I can do this, right? Because I think a lot of maybe more traditional workers, they want that 9 to 5, they want that structure, or at least they believe they want it. So I think that's kind of like what I'm probing on there.
Yeah, I got lucky in a sense because I came from the charitable sector, which is a sector that at the time I had just run my course in, didn't want to be in anymore. and moved into blockchain and crypto, which was something I was so passionate about, was really excited about. And so this idea of the distinction between what is work time and what is playtime was very blurred. Where, I would go to quote unquote work at this startup that I was working at, and come home and go to crypto meetups and read crypto blogs. And so there was a lot of bleed between the two worlds. And so from that standpoint, I think more because I love what I do so much, the distinction between what is work and what is personal time, it's not as clear. And so in some ways, I sort of look at things as like, this has given me the opportunity to do work-life integration in a sense, where which is probably not what everybody wants, but for me, it's like, okay, well, I'll take my holiday and I'm going to go on holiday with people that I know from the crypto space. They're my friends. We'll hang out together. Or if I'm working on a volunteer project, I'll go to a conference to pitch what I'm talking about there, and so it's still very enjoyable for me. And so I think I also find that my mind doesn't work as well on a fixed schedule. So I'll find that when I get up in the morning, I can put in an hour, maybe two of quality work. And then it's like somebody's lit a candle under my butt and I just can't sit down. So I'll be pacing around the house, doing all kinds of different stuff, and just can't focus on anything really important until nighttime. And then when nighttime comes, I can whip out the best product you've ever seen in the most efficient fashion. And so for me to try to be a really high quality worker in a 9-to-5 environment, it doesn't work. And so having that flexibility to just accept who I am and how my body works, and say, I'm going to get up, I'm going to do a couple things, I'll set some meetings, because I could do meetings really well in the middle of the day. But then, then I'm going to do laundry, and then I'm going to do groceries when no one's at the grocery store, and then I'm going to have a nap, and then, but when nighttime comes, it's work time. And so that sort of flexibility has really enabled me to actually produce much better quality output.
It's interesting you bring that up because in some respects, this is a general movement towards, hey, acknowledging that we aren't all uniform widgets in the traditional corporate hierarchy. But what do you say to like those people that are I guess rebelling against this, what you call work-life integration, and because I was reading an article recently. I'm not sure if you've seen Apple TV's Severance, where it's basically a dystopian view of work-life balance, where literally you go to work and they've implanted something in your brain where it's like your work self is completely separated from your life self, right? So as soon as you walk out the door, your personal life is separate. And this article was calling out the fact that these people, like this type of television show, is the exact opposite of what, to your point, that work-life community, right, that we saw in previous generations of television shows, right? I can't think of one off the top of my head, but do you think that as you think about this, right, and as you called it work-life integration, do you think that people can still have that balance, or is it something that they have to learn, and it's just something they have to break out of because it's been a cultural norm for so long?
I think the question is who's in control of that integration. And, is it the employee who says, I need the afternoon because that's when I pick up my kid and we hang out and we do homework, and then I'm going to come back and do things after they've gone to bed. To me, that type of work-life integration is really successful. Where it's not successful is when the employer has the expectation that you're available 24 hours a day to just drop what you're doing and work on something. And I think that's really the key distinction that matters, is where's the heart of this integration coming from? Is it true flexibility, where yes, work can now come at any point in the 24-hour cycle, but is that because the employee wants that and that's good for the employee, or is it because it's good for the company? And so I think I think there's key elements of team building where there's an expectation where you would want everyone to sort of be available at a certain amount of time during the day so that you can connect with each other. But beyond that, as we start to do global hiring and teams become more decentralized, you need this sort of asynchronous work style that enables people to live in the way that they want to.
It's interesting. So, you've brought up, again, many points, but one point I want to pick on is, what do you say to, and these CEOs will remain nameless, but so traditional CEOs that basically have said, hey, you have to come into the office either 3 or 5 days a week, otherwise, you can leave the company. Do you think that it is, to your point, an artificial, maybe cultural environment that they're trying to create, or is it something deeper that doesn't really work for like human productivity, to be perfectly blunt?
I think both of those can be true in a sense. I worked for one startup where we were primarily in place in an office, but we would hit the road, for weeks at a time to do, into fundraising and that sort of thing. And it was very difficult. It was very difficult to have this hybrid model where some people are together and are creating this culture, and other people are not. And I found that often when I was in the office, it was much easier to resolve conflicts because you have to sit in front of the person, and you're not going to send them an angry email at 2 a.m. You're going to say, hey, like, I saw that you did this. Can we talk about why that is? And so I do think there is a huge benefit to being face to face for creating that culture. I think the question is, are there other ways to do that, that don't involve coming into an office 3 to 5 days a week? And I think there are. I had one friend who worked for a company that was completely remote for 7 weeks, and in the 8th week, they brought them all to a particular location somewhere in the world. They hung out, nonstop for that week, and then they would go back. And so you would have these really intense moments of getting to know your work colleagues, both on a kind of a work level and also on a human level, because you're spending your dinners with them, you're having a drink after hours. The challenge with that is, like, what do you do when you've got a 1-year-old? How does that work for working parents? How does that work for people that have caregiving responsibilities? And so, there's certainly challenges there. I know a lot of the Web3 companies will bring their whole teams to different conferences that are happening. So they'll say, yeah, we're going to do this conference for the work stuff. We're going to stay 2 days extra for a little retreat, get to know each other, and then they go back to working remote. But, I think at the end of the day, this is going to be how most companies are going to operate moving forward, is with at least a significant proportion in a remote context. And so we need new ways of creating culture given that structure that we're working in. So I'd rather see, that as being the focus, as opposed to let's bring people back to the office because we don't know how to do it any other way.
And you hit on something that's very interesting, right? I mean, if you look at it from an operational process perspective, and there's, let's say, legal and regulatory implications, whether it's data privacy, et cetera, or taxation, and there's those structures. But I think you hit on something in terms of, management, right? We've trained a lot of our people to manage, like, hey, it's butts and seats, right? It's like, if you're not there, that means you're not working. And in some respects, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's almost like we have to retrain people. It's like, productivity is not about the number of hours you put in. Productivity is about, to your point earlier, the end work product. Is it of good quality? Did you put in the time, regardless of whether it was 2 a.m. local or 5 p.m. local? Would you say that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think so. So much of history is, as you say, it's how many hours did you put in? Were you there on time? Did you leave on time? And I think that's an outdated way at looking at work. I think, as you say, it really should be about, you're getting paid to produce something. And whether that thing is a tangible work output, or it's you're paid to think, you're paid to come up with ideas, you're paid to strategize. That's also, an important work product. And so I think as we move forward, just based on what I'm seeing in the crypto space, where so much of work is fractionalized and you have bounties and you have, these micro assignments that you can have, will that type of work be everybody's cup of tea? No, of course not. Some people are still going to want kind of a guaranteed full-time job. But, when I think about myself, I love to have a ton of projects on the go. I have to have a lot of different things that I can have my fingers in and bounce from one to the other. And so this ability to pick these little pieces from different projects that I think are interesting and test out, do I work well with this team? Is this project interesting? Do they, push things forward in a productive manner? I think that's actually going to help people find teams that they might want to put more work in with, that will be a better fit in the long run.
It's interesting you bring that up. I was having a discussion with someone actually earlier today, and we've kind of basically turned it into I don't want to say uniform, but we're saying that, like, whether it's someone like yourself or myself who comes from the tech space, we have that luxury, right? Whereas someone that's producing a physical good, we can't necessarily be remote. We have to be on site at the plant. But then there's other factors as well, right? I think you would probably agree we're both extroverted, but there's a lot of introverted people who may not necessarily like that, having to constantly go and figure out, hey, I want that fractionalization, to your point, 9 to 5. Do you think that remote work will help them, or and it's something that they don't need to fear, because there'll be new systems in place to kind of help them, and through the acknowledgement that we're all different, how we work is all different. So if you're an introvert, great, let's build the tools and operational processes to help you fit your personality versus someone like you and I, so that we can all, at the end of the day, collaborate to build a really great product or service.
Yeah. So surprising to you, probably, I am actually an introvert. And I have been in work environments where, there's a particular person that is, quite frankly, a terrible human being. And for me, going to work every day was awful. I've had work experiences where I didn't sleep at night because it was so stressful. And the greatest days were days when that person didn't show up. And so the idea of being able to just, excuse myself from that work environment, be at home, get my work done, and not have to deal with any of the kind of interpersonal shenanigans, to me, that's great. On the flip side, some of my best friends and some of my happiest memories have been with people I've met at work. And I will say that as someone who runs, I run my own business. I work just with myself and whoever my clients are, but it is lonely. I'm working at home by myself all day. And I miss those quality relationships where you could talk to people about interesting things that are happening in the project that you're working on. You swap ideas around. And so I attend way more conferences than I probably would if I were in a regular environment, to get that engagement and to connect and network with all those people. And I would say that as a result, my network is probably much broader, but not as deep, because I've met so many people at these different events, but I don't know them as well as I would if we were seeing each other every day. But I also think that something that we need to grapple with, which is a bit of a bigger theme that I'm seeing in society, is just the kind of continual isolation of individuals from communities within which they feel like a deep connection to.
Mhm.
And for a lot of people, that's a work family, or they get a lot of satisfaction from the relationships that they make there, and knowing that they're going in. And if you're at home working on a computer, it's just not the same. And so I think that could be challenging for people going through life, where, yeah, you get up, you're in pretty much the same room, you work by yourself, maybe with a couple of Zoom calls every day, and then you have dinner, and that, so it's, how are people still able to make meaningful connections in their lives that help them feel fulfilled as human beings, while having this beautiful flexibility of remote work. And I think that's where, when I look at myself, and I moved to Barbados since starting remote work, and what I find is, one of my friends, she works remotely for a UK company. She works UK hours. She's finished her day by 3 p.m. local time, and then she spends the afternoon surfing. And so the connections she's made are in the surf community, and are, people in her neighborhood and people she can kind of physically connect with here. So it's just a matter of looking at, like, what type of interpersonal connections do you need to feel fulfilled? And are you going to get those in social time, or are you going to get those with people, in more quote unquote work environments, or idea sharing environments?
I like how you phrased it, and I think it's very valid advice. You pointed out you moved to Barbados recently, and I think one of the things that, we've been talking a lot about the tech, right? To your point, it can be isolating working at home, on a laptop, with headphones or mic, etc. But let's look at the operational processes. I mean, if you could talk to politicians, talk to the CEOs of, I'm going to pick on transportation. That seems to be everyone's big topic these days. What would you say to politicians and maybe CEOs of transportation companies or other companies that are important to remote work? What do they need to do better, and what should they be doing to maybe encourage it?
Hmm, that's interesting. I mean, I think there's probably two big areas that are barriers to people for remote work, and number one is just jurisdictional challenges. So I have, some friends that work for the Canadian government, and they're not allowed to bring their laptop out of the country or the province. They have to physically be, which for government maybe I kind of get. But
Mhm.
there's other organizations where they just say, like, you can't be somewhere else. Barbados did a really brilliant job. I think they were the first country that launched what we call the welcome stamp visa, which is essentially a 1-year visa for remote workers, where they can come here. It's very, very clear that they don't pay taxes here. They're not residents here. So they pay taxes at home. So it's very clear for their employers what's going on. And that made things very easy for a lot of people, where they could just say, here, it's all spelled out, from a regulatory perspective. It's all good. I think that's probably the key piece. In terms of everything else, oh my goodness, just deliver my bags when I get to my new location would be my number one. um, yeah, no, I think, the rise of like co-working spaces has been really great for people. Um, I'd love to see a little bit more of the sort of decentralized co-working, where you can work in a restaurant, or someone's house if they're not using particular space, and just sort of see how we can make some of these smaller opportunities available all over the world. But for the most part, when I think about myself traveling in my 20s, like, internet wasn't really a thing. You could go to the internet cafe, and that you send an email to your mom, and then you keep going. But the ability for people to really work in meaningful ways all over the world is pretty much there.
It's interesting that you bring that up about jurisdiction. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, because in some respects, whether it's maybe more traditionalist CEOs or politicians thinking about their revenue and tax bases, they're concerned, right? How are they going to fund these physical infrastructure projects that are needed, whether it's roads, airport improvements, etc. If their high-paying tax base is like saying, "Hey, I'm going to spend 4 months in Barbados, 4 months in Brazil, and whoever knows where else." What do you say to those people in terms of um, you know if you're trying to put in more, let's call it jurisdictional hurdles to remote work, will that hurt you in the long run? Is that something that they need to do? Is there another way of thinking about it?
I think it's the last. We need to really rethink what it means to be a quote unquote resident, and what it means for taxes. Because you could say the same thing. We have remote workers that come down to Barbados. They use the roads, they use the systems. They're not paying into that in any way. And I think that's fundamentally what needs to change. What does that look like? I'm not totally sure. I mean, you could come up with some sort of system where it's a day by day calculation of where were you on this day, and that's where you pay taxes. But I mean, that would get extraordinarily complicated unless it was done on blockchain, and then I think you could do it a little more simply. But yeah, I think that's really it. Is you have to look at what does it mean to be connected to a particular geographic location, and I think that maybe in and of itself is not the system that we need to be using moving forward. So an example would be, as a Canadian, if I'm paying my taxes, I get access to public healthcare services. But if I leave the country for 4 months or more, I think it is, don't quote me on that, but roughly, then I lose access to my healthcare, but I still pay for it. And so in my mind, I'm like, either you pay and you get it, or you don't pay and you don't get it. Like, that doesn't connect to me. But then the idea that I should have access only to that sort of benefit because I have my feet in a location also doesn't make sense. I think there should be more access to, internationally available services that governments maybe historically provided. So maybe that's extraction from dangerous places, maybe it's healthcare, maybe it's unemployment insurance, maybe it's all these services that historically have been very centralized according to where you live, and that doesn't suit a nomadic population. So we need something that's going to come with us wherever we go.
I think there are a few startup ideas right in your previous statements there. So, and this has been a fascinating conversation. As I usually do on this podcast, that leaves the last word to our guests. So, any final thoughts on remote or hybrid work to this audience or other audiences listening around the world?
Oh, absolutely do it. The flexibility that it gives you is unparalleled. So many people live in places they don't want to live in because it's close to work, and or it's close to communities. And I think the reality is these incredible communities are shifting to places where the work-life balance or work-life integration is better for what you want to do. So don't wait, take the big leap. And if you don't like it, your 9 to 5 will be waiting for you.
Sounds good. Well, many thanks again, Anne, for joining the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.